People who've seen someone get fired on the first day. Why were they fired? Story 1 worked in a chemical plant as QC. To make it short, I was one of the chemists who check if the products were good enough to leave the plant. A guy working in production came for his first day. He took his break and he lighted a cigarette next to a 10,000 liters acetone tank. He was out before I could even blink an eye. Story 2 was in the local Walmart needing to take a leak. Walked into the bathroom to a manager and employee staring down a stall covered in. The manager was explaining to the dude that cleaning is in the job description. The guy responded, "Well, I'm sorry that this is my first day, but that," and walked out. Story 3 homeboy was allowed to play music on Bluetooth for the restaurant on the first day, went to the bathroom and started watching and forgot he was still on the speakers. Hilarity and dismissal ensued. Story 4 the afternoon of his first day as a developer, he was noticed downloading the source code of our main product app from the source control system to a personal USB stick. Said he wanted to take it home and mess with it in his spare time. Edit after some questions, some clarification. 1. This was after head signed the IT security policy to say he wouldn't, and they made sure people read it. 2. This was also in the mid-teens. In a company that really didn't like WFH, our nearest solution was RDP gateway into a non-prem physical desktop, and that was mostly an extreme weather option. The chief exec hated the concept of people not being in the office. 3. They were a small-scale developer organic growth from a two-man company over about 10 years that suddenly had to ramp up to a much larger set of developers, partly to update the tech stack, and was hiring fast and starting fast. It took a while for infrastructure security to catch up. In fact, this was partly the incident that kick-started the catch-up for I don't work there anymore. Average 20 below market rate pay really bites. Story 5 on my first day at Target, another new hire jokingly jumped into the cardboard compactor and the boss sent him packing instantly. It wasn't on or anything, they just have a zero-tolerance policy when it comes to jackassery. Who had been on the job for less than an hour, so he made something like 6 total while working for Target. Story 6 I hired temp for data input. Her first day a guy pulled me aside and said, "She can't be here." Apparently one of our full-time employees had a restraining order against her. I sent the employee home and apologized, then called her agency and told them she was not welcome back. Not sure what the order was for, but my guess is stalking. Story 7 I was working at a large-scale architectural firm in the Bay Area in 2004, and they hired a new guy, and after his orientation and paperwork he finally gets to his cubicle. The first thing he does is puts on his headphones and blasts death metal Cannibal Corpse so loud that everyone can hear, and that's him using headphones. However, that was not got him fired. His first work item was to write a company-wide email that said Debbie Harry of Blondie was responsible for 911 and wrote about 30,000 words for it. I have never seen our HR manager run out of her office so fast. Story 8 he was a first-day blackjack dealer. He took in 5 cash and exchanged it for a 500 chip. The lady stared at him for a good 20 seconds, picked up her chip and left the building. Gaming took his badge shortly after. Story 9 dishwasher, first day on the job, went on break and went to the bar next door. Took a while to come back, so chef went and found him. We needed a dishwasher bad and he was actually pretty quick at doing dishes. Chef gives him a second chance, second day, goes on break again and stops at 711. Gets a tall boy of Mike's Hard and starts drinking it right outside the back door. We have a picnic table right outside our back door for staff to eat smoke. Chef finds him again and fires him on the spot. Sad part is, my chef probably wouldn't have gave it if he was always drunk. It was the fact he didn't even try to hide it. Story 10 I worked in a kitchen and a new guy came in. I asked him to grab something from our cleaning supplies storage, which was in a shed out back. He was gone for a while, so I took a look at the cameras and he was smoking a blunt while peeing in the shed right next to the cleaning supplies. Story 11 I was a bartender. It was his first day of training. He smacked my when I was bent over to get ice. I flipped out on him. He got fired in front of me. Story 12 nurse who failed his drug test on the first day. He did the test days prior. We got results on his first day. He replied, "Yeah, I thought that might happen," when he was told he failed his UDS. Just turned around and walked out. Story 13 graphic designer. Didn't know how to use a mouse. Edit since this comment got a ridiculous amount of traffic, let me explain it a bit. She was an older lady that had done graphic design back in the 70s 80s when it was mainly analog, and she was just getting back into the workforce after her kids had moved out, not realizing that 100 of the work was now digital. Nice person. Everyone was sad that she had to be let go. I was a contractor for this company, not directly employed, and only heard of it firsthand from the director of the department. Story 14 kid lied about his experience as a foreman and drove a skid into the side of the house we were working on. Fork straight into the siding. It was hilarious. Story 15 guy at fast food place showed up drunk and 3 hours late. Then he didn't clock in, just started working. When the manager asked him to clock in he yelled. She was a tiny lady, so she called in another manager to help fire him. Story 16 I was bartending at a sports bar in Hell's Kitchen. New guy training first day, supposedly several years of experience. He attempted to shake a Jack and Coke, and of course covered the bar in his mess. Didn't come back for day 2. Story 17 my first day was also the first day for another dude, who showed up an hour and a half late. After being there for about 15 minutes and sort of starting helping me do the very first task we were assigned, he gets pulled into an office and fired. On his way out, he is walking past where I'm still working and he says they fired me for being late. I can't believe it. Do you think you can give me a ride? I laughed out loud and sheepishly said, "Sorry dude, I'm kinda working right now." He thanked me anyways and walked out the building. He accidentally did me a big favor because so many of my new coworkers saw that interaction and thought it was so incredibly hilarious. They all became immediately friendly with me to talk about it. Story 18. Fighting with a customer by getting in their face and yelling at them. The thought the company owed him loyalty for being an employee. Oh boy, wait until he learns. Edit for clarity. This guy was 100 at fault. He was damaging an item the customer bought. The customer politely asked him to be more careful, and that was all it took for the guy to snap. Story 19. Our town's mayor forced his spoiled son to get a job at a restaurant where I worked. On his first day of training as a host, the kid sat in the waiting area looking at his phone instead of standing behind the host's stand greeting customers. The trainer tried to sort him out a couple of times, but he'd just greet one customer, walk them to their table, then go right back to sitting. The manager came to talk to him, then the kid says, "I can't do this," and heads for the exit. They told him if he was going to walk off his shift he shouldn't bother coming back, and the kid just waved on his way out. He only lasted a couple hours. Story 20. We fired a 16-year-old girl on her first training shift of being a cashier when the manager caught her doing bong rips in the employee washroom on her 15-minute break. Story 21. Warehouse job right out of high school. Guy started hitting on the young lady that was our supervisor, and when she let him know that wouldn't fly, he started in with the hardcore, misogynistic BS about how she couldn't possibly be good enough to be a supervisor of men among a lot of other. He was gone before lunch. Story 22. I've worked at a daycare for the past 15 years. One girl that got hired got fired within 1 hour by calling the babies things and screaming out stuff like, "How do I shut this thing up?" or "God, these things smell so bad." I kicked her out of the classroom after 10 minutes of thus. I much rather have been by myself, and she was found laying on the break room table playing on her phone. I never saw the HR people get to my center so fast. Story 23. Dude made a offensive black joke right next to a black lady also on orientation. The HR lady was there and immediately fired him and had security walk him out. Story 24. New hire called in on the first day of orientation tells them she can't start work until next week. Quarantine the day she was supposed to return to work with Dr. Note. Worked a couple of days. She called in again and said 2 weeks before she could come back to work. Hurt her back. She worked the first 2 days after her leave was up and called in the next day saying it would be another week before she could come back to work. At that point they had reviewed some security footage for law enforcement unrelated and caught her stealing, not from the company but from another employee. She was fired. 2 days later her husband shows up to surprise her at work with a homemade dinner. Boss has to deal with it. Apparently she was telling him she was working a lot of hours for the last month and a half. Story 25. I fired a man on the first day for incompetence. I work in IT. He claimed to have years of experience, but even after I showed him how to edit a text file in Notepad, he couldn't do it. Story 26. Worked as a chef earlier in my life. Dishwasher guy walked into the stockroom and I literally watched him put a bottle of like 2 cooking Melrot under his apron and walk out. I grabbed the exec chef and we confronted him. He says I wasn't stealing it, I was just going to drink it. Exec left to get security hotel and casino and he runs past me with a knife in his hand, grabs the bottle, uses the knife to shove the cork in and pathetically drinks about 34 of it. When he was done he stood up all seeming proud. I held out hand and he put the knife in my hand which I handed off to the other dishy. Then put my hand back out and he gave me the bottle. I lightly bopped him on the head with it and said hope this rancid was worth it and then stepped aside as security dragged him out of the pit. They asked police or just toss him. I answer he lost his job over a 2 bottle of wine, just let the guy go home. Story 27. He got drunk at a company-sponsored happy hour and tried to convince some of his new coworkers how cool it would be if they could and proceeded to describe assaulting another employee at the event. It wouldn't have mattered who it was, but the icing on the cake was she was the VP of marketing. Story 28. I worked in audiovisual for large corporate events a long time ago. We had a helper from another location help on a big conference. He criticized everything from the moment he walked in. After his shift, our boss chewed him out. He cried on his way out the door, then he forgot his car keys and had to come back in. He wasn't fired. But he never came back to our location to help again. Story 29. Dude got a job at a Fortune 250 company as a direct report to a direct report of the executive committee. Was likely at least a $500K job. After his first day, he takes his team about 30 people out for drinks and apps. This is kind of a no-no as it's going to be a significant company expense and the company is trying to cut back. Still, this isn't anywhere near enough to get him fired. Just an odd choice. He ends up getting blackout drunk and harassing 2 female employees on his team, asking them to sit on his lap, putting his arm around them. His behavior was recorded and via phone. Next day he has a meeting with HR and was terminated. Story 30. I got fired at the end of my first day of work at a small gift shop in a national park. Apparently I was supposed to show up for my first day of work knowing the entire product line, where it was located on the shelves, how much it cost, and where everything was in the storage room. The other employee, who was the golden girl and had worked there for 3 years, refused to help me learn and spent most of the day sitting out back getting high. The kicker was, the owner had spent the entire day upstairs watching the security cameras to see how I was doing, and knew that the other girl wasn't there doing her job. On the plus side, the owners of a nearby restaurant had been in the shop and we had chatted while I was trying to find the item that they wanted. They hired me to work reception in their place because they figured that if I could still be pleasant and chatty while having an awful day, then I would be perfect to greet their customers. It ended up being a good summer. Story 31. She openly bragged to a manager she was amazed she passed the drug test. They even gave her the "yeah, I didn't hear that" line. She repeated herself louder. Story 32. I worked in security for a hospital, and this guy comes in and asks where to meet his supervisor because he wasn't familiar with the building yet. Everything was checking out, but we make everyone go through our weapons screening system. This dude really didn't think anything of it, but his backpack alerted on our system. It was at that moment the guy realized that he had something he shouldn't have. I'm honestly surprised he told me this, but he said he forgot he had his disassembled rifle in his backpack. The dude quickly leaves the building, and every time a firearm entered the building, we had to report it to our supervisors. After receiving the report, our supervisor quickly rushed down and started checking cameras trying to find out where he went, and escalated it to our HRO and our chief security officer. Apparently, the guy never came back, but we did confirm with the supervisor that he was supposed to meet and that it indeed was his first day on the job. It was a military backpack, so I'm assuming he was former military and just forgot it in there. But after this whole incident, my supervisor smiles and says, well, this was his first and also his last day here. Crazy to think someone can just forget it in their bag though. Story 33. My first job for me at a bank. Just finished training 3 days and coming in for the first real day of work, and a guy who had been training with me showed up absolutely plastered. I don't mean hungover, I mean like rancid smelling 100 still shit-faced. I didn't know him that well, don't remember his name, but he did not appear to be a party guy or anything over the last few days. He had showed up on time and everything. He didn't even get a chance to put anything in his cubicle to clear out. Our direct manager told him to go to HR immediately for his termination, and that was that. I still don't get the logic that was going on in his head. If he got like that, just don't show up and make some sort of an excuse or something. It is a bad look to miss a first day, but it cannot possibly be worse than the option he took. Story 34. Mortgage company, 2017. A manager hired in from outside, not an internal promote, meets his team. I am on it, probably only 4 to 5 people at that time, but one of them is a very well put together lady. She is younger than me, and I am younger than the manager guy was. She was super sweet and in no way interested in any office romance, let alone a guy probably twice her age. Literally at the first meeting, right after she introduced herself and said her name, he responded with, "Wow, you're a looker, we should smash, you like it?" And then he 100 gave the rest of us a Michael Scott look, realizes what he has said is awful, but we just have to marinate in the silence that followed. The victim left the room quietly, told the district manager in the next room over what happened, and the new guy was fired immediately after his welcome. Story 35. First day at McDonald's, and they stole 20 from the till because they didn't bring lunch that day. Was so dumb because we got free meals on our lunch break. At a nail salon, they said they had experience, certificates, and had been nominated for a national award for their nail art. Couldn't even do a basic manicure and got frustrated and screamed at the manager when she questioned them on it. Story 36. Not first day but first week. Kid sat on his phone the whole week and barely did anything, then apparently was very surprised when he was almost immediately fired. Story 37. We were in a meeting with our IT team and a few execs. We had a new guy, and our manager introduced him and asked him to tell us something fun or interesting about him. He told a 5-minute story about blacking out at a tailgate at his party school. I don't think anyone told him the 30-year-old guy across the table was our very serious CIO. Story 38. I was working at a bookstore in a small town, and they hired this guy to be a bookseller cashier. On his first day, he asked if he could set out a stack of zines that he and his buddies made together about the environment. I didn't read it, so I don't know specifically what it was about. The owner of the store said sure, why not, so he put out a little stack. We learned later that day that he had no work experience, did not like to read books, and he just spent the whole day trying to sell his homemade zines to customers. He did not return to work after that. He also did not sell any zines that day. Story 39. I had a guy who was temp, came from another site that did the same thing that we did, knew a lot, went through the process, got an interview to get hired on full time. They did their background check and the next day they walked him out. I don't know what they found. Even the cool people wouldn't say, but they walked him straight the out and then pretended he didn't exist afterwards. Story 40. Dumbassness. There's a really weird phenomenon in the welding trades from what I've seen. Will pass a weld test, then not be able to weld for once they're on the clock. I've seen people show up on day one and just everything up. Can't fit, can't weld, can't read a print, nothing. Part of the reason they even get hired is a lot of shops have the testing done by one of the people on the floor who still has their own to do, so unless they see obvious signs, they just pass anyone so they can get back to their work. The other part of the problem is management will very often ignore the recommendations of the testers and hire people that they say should not be hired simply because every shop is permanently understaffed and management is just hiring anyone and praying, if you can actually fabricate and weld, a shop will pretty much hire you on the spot. I have never taken a weld test and not been immediately offered a job. Part of that is because I know what I'm doing. Part of it is because of the management issues. New VP of sales starts vaping inside HQ office during the broadcasted all hands on video, all while talking like a big shot. Story 41. Right after he turned 21. My best friend got a job in a busy restaurant. During his very first lunch break, he sat down at the bar, ordered a chocolate martini, and drank it. Story 42. I was a bartender for a day, never got called to come back in. The issue was that a customer reached behind the bar to show me how to make his drink. They knew I had no experience, and my trainer left me there in the first hour to go outside and chain smoke cigarettes. The owner sat at the bar and watched me struggle and fired me for letting the customer help. I'm glad I got fired. Story 43. I've had to fire 2 people for trying to fight people on the first day. One dude felt threatened by everyone surrounding him like he wasn't sitting right next to our clock and device, started throwing slurs and trying to for some reason fight the only guy who wasn't surrounding him and was just sitting down enjoying his lunch. The second guy wasn't following safety rules and got mad when someone called him out on it. He got into a screaming match with the guy saying he's been doing this for longer than the other guy's been alive. He was a 20-year-old talking to a 50-year-old man who had been doing this work for 30 years. I realized he might be stupid and fired him. Story 44. He asked his coworkers if they ever had the thoughts of killing somebody or at least torturing animals and was surprised nobody said of course. Yeah, the next day he was fired cause people were afraid to work with him and went to the CEO immediately. Story 45. Guy was hired to be a truck driver for us, had his CDL already, got asked to go take a drug test and couldn't pass. For anyone wondering, if you have your CDL you should already know that drug testing is very likely to happen. Also, if you are hiring people that will need to pass drug tests regularly, maybe bring it up and don't wait till their first day to do it. Story 46. We hired a field tech to drive a company car out around the city and complete IT tasks MSP, got through like 4 rounds of interviews in his first day, and at the end, was filling out the usual HR forms. They got to the part where they needed a photocopy of his driver's license, and found out he didn't have one. Story 47. I was working in a shop, very basic shelf facing in the evenings before close. They asked me to show this new guy how it's done. I then left him with a section to sew while I continued on. Once no one was watching he just stopped and stared blankly at it, like almost catatonic. It was a boring low-paid but very undemanding job. But the time would still go by way faster doing it than just staring into nothing. And he didn't seem stoned. I didn't see him after that evening. He looked like a young Charles Manson though, so I was happy enough not to see him again. Story 48. Worked in a kitchen when I was in high school. This guy starts the same time as me, opening the place. He was told to go and cut fries for later that night. The place was really laid back, and management didn't care what you did as long as your work was done. A few hours later when dinner rush comes through there are no fries. I don't know what he did for nearly 5 hours but not a single Friday was made. Owner the CLES in and fires him, not for not cutting the fires, but he was caught stealing money from the till by a camera. Story 49. This girl walked into her first shift with blue hair. Where I worked had a pretty strict hair, makeup and piercings dress code, and she had been told at her interview, where she had brown hair, about the strict rules and had signed a uniform policy form. This was almost excusable, but she just made it worse from there. During her training in another area, I was working close by and she turned, interrupting her trainer to tell me that I, another trainer, was doing my job incorrectly. She then asked if I'd like her to show me how to do it properly. I said no thanks and ignored her, then complaining to the other new girl about how rude I was and how she blue hair would be my boss within a couple of weeks. What got her in the end was a rare visit from the owner, who was a no-nonsense, serious businesswoman with about 8 restaurants under her belt. She greeted blue hair, asked how her first day was going, then very politely informed her she would need to fix her hair as it was against policy. This set off blue hair and she started yelling at the owner that she'd read the policy. There was nothing against blue hair and she was an idiot who couldn't tell blue hair what to do. The owner just very succinctly explained who she was, that she could tell blue hair what to do, and that the uniform policy had been written the owner herself. Blue hair just stared at her. The owner took the trainer and the manager into the office. Blue hair didn't seem concerned at all and joked about the promotion she was about to receive. They called blue hair in after about 10 minutes, and within 2 minutes she was then marched out of the restaurant with her head down, never to be seen again. Story 50. Those bastards at Anderson Pre-Enron. Poor guy finally got his first big job and his mom was coming into town for dinner to celebrate. First in his family to graduate college. All that, well they had a client meeting over lunch and apparently at some point he got a splash of soup on his tie. Some high-up manager saw him and said get that slob out of here before a client sees him. Guy was bawling outside the Minneapolis location off of 3rd Street. I bumped into him and got his story. Sadly, I've seen worse, but the fact his mom was coming down. I parked him at the IDS building lobby and made a few calls. Needless to say none of us were happy about it, but a few calls were made and we had him a new job, and a pay bump apparently before his mom met him that evening. In all my years I've never seen a group of effectively random strangers come together like that to help someone out, and just a general mutual hatred for Anderson. Big thanks apparently to, God this was 26 years ago, but I want to say it was a joint effort between a Target exec at the time and someone over at Robert Half that made some seriously fast calls. I want to say it was, Excel, well I think it was still NSP at that time that picked him up, don't know what happened to the guy after that. Hope things turned out well, but at least Enron happened and a little justice happened in the world. I want to say his name was Brandon Ben, I think it started with a B, looked a little like Woody Allen. Edit correction, it was 3rd Street not 5th. The intersection of 5th and 3rd is a club, it was 3rd and 8th. Story 51. We worked at a Home Depot customer service desk. The new lady walks onto the floor, middle of the day, puts her apron on and says let's customer service the out of these people. The manager was standing right behind her. the lady wasn't brought back the next day. Story 52 worked as the cashier who helped train the new ones on how to use the register IRL. They usually had done the computer course first. Worker didn't know the English alphabet at all, nor could they understand English written words, kind of necessary to work the store's internal catalog. HR did some digging that day and found out that the hiring facility was using interpreters to do the online classes. That week we lost over 10 new cashiers. Story 53 dude tried to rape a coworker in her car in the parking lot at lunch. On his first day, like what the absolute man, fortunately another coworker interrupted him before he could do more than scare her. Story 54 worked in a call center, for a month as a side gig on weekends, soul-crushing work. I saw a girl being trained and told she could not hit her vape multiple times, told her trainer she wouldn't bring it to not be tempted, kept ripping it during her first hours of the job, got fired, it was a weed vape. Story 55 my first job was working at a concession stand. The owner was pedantic and labeled a ton of equipment that needed no explanation, microwave, register, oven, etc. I thought it was dumb, since all staff spoke the same language fluently, and added a label to everything in the room. Soda machine, broom, cups, ceiling, floor wall, and on and on. I was called in the next day and told that I should find a new line of work. Story 56 not the first day, but because of the first day, the dude randomly threatened to kill me, just introduced myself and literally the first words out of his mouth were, "I'm going to kill you, I'm going to slice your neck with this," then shows me a metal scrapper. Then when I was at the supply closet he just took off my hat and tried to play with my hair. When I pushed him off, again he told me that he was going to kill me. I wrote a complaint against him. Luckily I had witnesses he was fired. I was later told by a friend of his how mad he was towards me, but luckily I never saw or heard from him again. Story 57 I briefly worked as a temp staging new cars for local delivery at a port, and since the facility was secure, the keys were left inside the cars between being moved off the ship to where the truckers would pick them up or the longshoremen would load them onto rail cars. A group of new hires were brought on board and at the end of the day, the manager addressed them to say they all did a great job and to see if anybody had any questions. One guy pulled handfuls of car keys from his pockets and asked, "What do I do with these?" Keep in mind that the remotes had not yet been programmed, so the only way to figure out which key went to which car was to try every single one by hand. He did not come back the next day. Story 58 we hired an exchange admin to manage the company email servers. His background check came back after he started. There was judgment against him from an old employer. He had gotten mad about something and sent threatening emails to customers from the CEO's account. They fired him and sued him. Our management escorted him out. Story 59 I was a call center manager for a non-profit. Lots of college students, lots of retirees looking for something to do, but the work was important. I hired one such college student who had a great phone interview, a great in-person interview, and so we gave her the job. Told her the date of the next training class. Start time is 9 o'clock a.m. She said see you there, done and done. We get to the date of training and I peek in on the class and I notice she's not there. She goes to the university that is literally 2 blocks north, so I give it 15 minutes, circle back around, still not there. I peek my head in while folks are working on paperwork and I ask the trainer if they've heard from her. No dice, so I give her a call and she says, "Oh yes, sorry, my RA told me I had to be at a dorm meeting this morning, I'll be there later." To which my reply was, "My recommendation for your next job is that you actually show up on time and if you can't, that you call your employer and let them know in advance. You are no longer employed with us. Thanks." Was it a bit harsh, maybe, but my RA says I have to be late for work is not a valid excuse as a lesson she needed to learn. Story 60 print company didn't like me as their current printer operator because I wasn't fast enough. Ignore that I was the only printer operator for 6 industrial machines and graphic designer. They hired a new guy with a lot of printing experience under the guise of helping out, but the writing was on the wall. I was 100 training my replacement. He spent the entire day complaining about our processes and how our flatbed printer was ancient, refused to work it, refused to work our paper printer as that was beneath him. They tried to reason with him and he wouldn't have it, demanded the shop to spend $100K on a newer modern flatbed so that he can work. Suddenly after firing him, they don't have an issue with me anymore. I actually do my job despite how stretched thin I was. Could have had someone much worse. Story 61 was at my first day of training. It was supposed to be a class of 8, but only 7 showed. The department manager came in, asked where the missing person was, to which the trainer said they didn't show. Manager went in the hall and made a phone call, asking them where they were. Manager came back in the room a minute later, said they asked the missing person where they were they running late, etc. Missing person said they had applied at a different employer and they were hoping to get a call from them. Then they asked the manager if he still wanted them to come in today anyways. Manager told them not to bother. Story 62 I actually had to fire someone on their first day. They showed up and immediately put their 2 weeks notice in. They thought that we'd just keep them on and spend money training them for a position they did not intend to keep. I didn't feel good about it, but I was just the assistant manager in a shitty corporate cafe job. So that's one way to get let go on your first day. Story 63 I used to work for a company that hired a journeyman from the union hall to work for them. On the first day he is late to his orientation because he sat in his truck in the parking lot expecting someone to get him, but the company looks past it and gives him his paperwork to fill out and the address to go take his drug test. He is also given the foreman's number to call after he finished his drug test. When he finished his drug test he called the foreman and said the day is pretty much a wash and he's gonna call it, to which the foreman said there is still 4 hours left in the workday and he can still get some stuff done. He refuses to show up and says he is just going home and will be there tomorrow, to which the foreman said if he doesn't show up that day he won't have a job tomorrow. The guy then starts calling the company and berating the front desk people to transfer him to the owner of the company. When the owner talked to him he went off on the owner and started calling him racial slurs. The owner told him he can show up to the shop to pick up his paycheck because he isn't going to be working for his company, and if he tries to get into the building he will have the cops called for trespassing. When the guy showed up he tried to apologize, saying he was going through some things in life and really needed this job, but the owner just gives him his paycheck and the union hall kicked the guy out of the union.